I mean, imagine possessing the most devastating military armada in the history of the universe. Like,
Right.
you have hundreds of these heavily armored battleships. They're bristling with advanced weaponry, fully staffed by a disciplined, loyal military force.
You're completely ready to go.
Exactly. You are ready to strike down your enemies and secure your empire. But then, imagine you cannot move a single one of those ships a single inch
Wow.
because a private billionaire just, decided to turn off your engines.
Yeah, just pulled the plug.
And there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. I mean, that is the exact suffocating nightmare currently facing the ruler of the known universe.
It's a logistical and strategic paradox. It perfectly illustrates the fragility of power.
Yeah.
Like you can wear the crown, but if someone else owns the roads.
You aren't really in charge.
Exactly. You're not in charge at all.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you are joining us today because we have a stack of sources that is going to take us right into the heart of that very paradox.
It's a great one today.
Oh, totally. Today, we are looking at excerpts from the sci-fi epic Navigators of Dune. And our mission for you today is to map out this truly complex three-way galactic standoff.
Right. We're looking at a civilization being pushed to the absolute brink of total war here.
Yeah, but what makes this so fascinating is that when you peel back the grand political speeches, and the movements of massive fleets.
The shiny stuff.
Exactly, the shiny stuff. When you look past that, this entire galactic conflict is actually being driven by these deeply personal, profoundly unhealed vendettas.
Yeah. To give you the big picture context before we get into the details, we are looking at a fledgling Imperium here.
Right.
This is a human race that is still reeling from severe, generational trauma. For centuries, humanity was enslaved by thinking machines.
Highly advanced, sentient, artificial intelligence.
Right, and the humans eventually fought a massive, bloody, holy war, the Bolarian Jihad, to free themselves. And they won.
They won, but
But now, less than a century later, the universe is completely fractured again. You have an emperor desperate to consolidate control. You have a megacorporation that holds an absolute airtight monopoly on all space travel.
And you have an army of fanatical anti-technology zealots running rampant, right?
Yeah.
Just burning anything more complicated than a pulley.
Literally burning it, yeah.
Now, before we jump in, we do need to make something very clear. The source text we are exploring today deals with some incredibly extreme ideologies.
Very extreme.
Right. On one end of the spectrum, you have unregulated, completely ruthless corporate technological progress that views human life as a rounding error.
Just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. And on the other end, you have violent, religious anti-technology fanaticism that routinely murders innocent people in the name of purity.
Yeah, neither side's great.
No, not at
Okay.
all. And our goal in this deep dive is purely to report on the text, right?
Yeah.
To pull apart these fascinating concepts and to see how the architecture of this universe functions.
We are definitely not endorsing any of these viewpoints.
No, we are just here to explore the brilliant, terrifying ideas contained within the source material. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Starting with the man who is theoretically in charge of everything, but effectively trapped.
The paralyzed throne.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we open on an incredibly vivid scene that tells you everything you need to know about the illusion of power. Emperor Roderick Corrino is in orbit, high above the planet Seleucia Secundus.
Right.
And he is standing in the command center of his ceremonial barge. Let's talk about this barge because it is essentially a floating metaphor.
Oh, it really is.
The interior is glittering with gold and precious gems. The hull is sculpted with all these flashy curves and adornments that serve absolutely no practical or military purpose. It is like a massive flying jewel.
Yeah, and it's designed to project soft power. It's a stunning visual statement intended to overawe anyone who is easily swayed by wealth and ostentation.
Because he doesn't have the hard power.
Exactly. Historically, when an empire is actually bankrupt or politically weak, its rulers often lean into absurdly lavish displays to convince their subjects and themselves, honestly, that they are still untouchable.
And what is so interesting is that Roderick actually hates it.
He does.
He's a pragmatic man, and he finds the ship incredibly gaudy. This barge was beloved by his older brother, Salvador, the previous emperor.
Right. who is dead.
Yeah, Salvador was assassinated, and Roderick has just recently assumed the throne. So he's standing in his dead brother's flashy, useless ship, wearing the scarlet and gold robe of his noble house, understanding that as much as he loathes the aesthetic, he desperately needs the royal ceremony.
It's to look the part.
Right. He needs to project absolute, unshakable power precisely because he doesn't actually have it.
Because the reality of his political situation is precarious to the point of collapse,
Oh, totally.
Outside the wide, transparent viewing window of that barge, his military is preparing for a desperate surprise attack against the man who engineered his brother's assassination.
Right, director Josef Venport.
The head of the massive commercial monopoly, Venport Holdings.
So Roderick is watching hundreds of his battleships glide into these holding arrays within an immense fold space carrier. And he is standing there with his new military commander, General Vincent Roon.
And the dynamic between these two men is so interesting.
It's a masterclass in how competent leaders put aside personal baggage for a greater strategic goal.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, General Roon and Roderick were actually boyhood friends, but they had a massive, tumultuous falling out years ago over a woman named Haditha.
Because of course they did. It's always a love triangle that derails everything.
Always a love triangle. And Roderick actually won her heart. He married Haditha.
Which means Roon had to swallow a bitter, public, personal defeat.
Yeah, and since then, they've only spoken in highly formal military settings, right? Maintaining a very icy professional distance.
But now, in this moment of galactic crisis, Roderick intentionally uses Roon's first name. Right, Vincent. He actively bridges that gap, even mentioning that Haditha sends her regards. He is basically acknowledging the painful past, but insisting they move beyond it because the stakes are simply too high for petty grievances.
And Roon responds beautifully to that. He accepts that Roderick won, and he explicitly thanks the Emperor for not letting their personal history stand in the way of his recent promotion.
Because Roderick desperately needs competent men right now.
Desperately.
The Imperial armed forces under his brother Salvador had been an absolute disaster. The sources describe it as being bloated with undeserved ranks, teeming with corruption, graft, and total ineptitude.
Which is why Roderick just conducted this massive audit.
Right, a massive purge of the military, sweeping away all these incompetent upper-level officers, including the former commanding general Admo Sexby.
That purge is such a critical detail, Roderick is trying to transition his empire from a system based on aristocratic nepotism, which his brother just loved, to a pure meritocracy.
Because you can't win a war with guys who bought their shiny medals.
Exactly. You cannot win a war of survival with generals who bought their commissions. You need killers and tacticians. So Roon is the new guy in charge, eager to prove himself.
And Roderick tells him, "Take care of him for me, Vincent. I'll await your triumphant return." And Roon promises to move the stars and planets to prove himself. But here is the massive, crippling strategic nightmare they are facing.
It's so wild to think about.
It's bizarre from a modern perspective. The Emperor has this massive strike force of powerful battleships. They have devastating weaponry, but those battleships do not have Holtzman engines.
We really need to explain exactly what that means, because it is the linchpin of the entire galactic economy.
Go for it.
A Holtzman engine is the only technology in existence capable of folding space, which allows a ship to travel faster than light. Without a Holtzman engine, it would take centuries to travel between star systems.
Right. So to get anywhere, the entire Imperial military relies completely on Venport Holdings' massive fold space carriers to haul them around.
They have to hitch a ride.
They have to literally park their battleships inside a corporate transport vessel. It is the craziest vulnerability.
It really is.
Think about our analogy from the beginning. It is like having the most powerful, technologically advanced modern navy on Earth, like nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, the works. But a single private corporation owns all the oceans.
And not only do they own the oceans, but the Imperial pilot who is flying that borrowed VenHold carrier is effectively flying blind.
Yeah, that's the other huge problem.
Because the Holtzman engine can fold space, but folding space is incredibly dangerous. You are moving through unpredictable quantum realities.
Right, if you just jump blindly, there's a very high probability you will materialize inside a star or a planet or just disappear forever.
Exactly. During the time of the thinking machines, advanced AI calculated the safe paths. But AI is strictly banned now. So how do you navigate safely?
Use navigators.
Exactly. And only Venport Holdings knows how to create them. These are highly advanced, spice-mutated beings who can use prescience to foresee safe pathways through the vast, unpredictable reaches of fold space.
They look into the future.
They literally look into the immediate future, see which path leads to destruction, and choose the safe one. And ever since Josef Venport was exposed as the mastermind behind Emperor Salvador's murder, he's withdrawn all of his navigators from Imperial service.
He went completely rogue. 2 months ago, Venport escaped justice, and he just pulled the plug on the Empire.
Just cut them off.
He withdrew all his commercial ships, cut off interstellar trade, leaving countless planets starving and in dire need of provisions.
The smaller, private fleets are scrambling to fill the void, but they are sluggish and incredibly dangerous without navigators.
Wait, so if Venport controls all the safe, fast transport, he doesn't just hold the military hostage. He controls the entire galaxy's food supply.
Yep.
He is deliberately starving planets to force a political outcome.
That is exactly the leverage he is applying. But the most immediate insult for Emperor Roderick is an actual hostage situation.
Oh, right, the fleet.
When this whole crisis kicked off, one entire battle group of the Imperial Armed Forces, 70 powerful warships, were just doing a routine transit aboard a VenHold carrier.
And because those warships don't have their own Holtzman engines.
Venport just kept them. He locked them away, taking 70 Imperial warships right off the galactic chessboard without firing a single shot.
That is infuriating. I mean, you can see why Roderick is absolutely seething on that barge. He tells Rune that Venport wants to hamstring the throne, to force the Emperor to be a mere figurehead, while this commercial empire extends its tentacles everywhere.
Dictating policy through economic blackmail.
Exactly. And Rune, acting as the practical military mind, asks a very logical question. Doesn't Venport also want to eradicate the Butlerian fanatics, the anti-technology zealots?
Because Rune points out, the Butlerians have caused massive destruction to Imperial infrastructure as well.
This is the central strategic dilemma of the entire text. Both Roderick and Venport passionately hate the Butlerians, and their hatred is deeply personal.
Very personal. The Butlerian mobs actually killed Roderick's beautiful little daughter during a riot.
Right, so they share a mutual bitter enemy. Rune is quietly suggesting that perhaps an alliance, or at least a temporary truce, where they stay out of Venport's way while his forces kill the fanatics, might be the most pragmatic move.
But Roderick absolutely refuses. He says, not if it means we must cooperate with the man who assassinated Salvador. I will never agree to that.
And on top of that, Roderick suspects Venport might be responsible for the disappearance of his sister, Anna Corrino.
Now, Anna vanished from the planet Lampadas during a Butlerian siege of the Mentat school.
And Rune points out the obvious flaw in Roderick's logic there, right? It makes much more sense to blame the Butlerian leader, Manfred Tyrando, for Anna's disappearance, since his forces were the ones actually attacking the school.
Yeah, but Roderick admits he just finds ways to blame Venport for everything, even though Venport is only responsible for half his problems.
It highlights how blinding personal vendettas can be, especially for someone who holds ultimate authority.
Roderick is the emperor. He should be a pure pragmatist. A pure pragmatist would look at the board and say, Venport wants to spend his own blood and treasure destroying the religious fanatics who murdered my daughter. I will let him do it.
Right, and once both sides are exhausted, I will arrest Venport.
Exactly. But Roderick cannot get past the murder of his brother. He says, I should hold that much power and no one else. He is risking the survival of his empire on a sudden, secret decapitation strike to kill or capture Director Venport at his heavily fortified headquarters.
And the fact that Roderick is relying on a pilot flying without a navigator to deliver this strike force just emphasizes his desperation.
It's a suicide mission if the math is wrong.
If they miscalculate the fold space jump, his entire newly purged, competent military command could end up vaporized inside a sun. But let's assume they make it. If Emperor Roderick is launching his blind ships into the void, what exactly is he marching into?
That's the real question.
Venport's reliance on horrific monopolized technology isn't just a business strategy, it's a defensive posture against the entire universe. So let's transition to the Tycoon's fortress on the planet Kolhar.
Yeah, we meet Director Josef Venport here. And it's fascinating because the source text doesn't paint him as a cartoon villain sitting in a dark room scheming to take over the universe.
No, he doesn't see himself that way at all.
He actually views himself as the victim of immense irrationality. The text quotes an internal VenHold memo he wrote saying, there are those who see influence and power as a reward rather than a responsibility. Such men do not make good leaders.
He genuinely believes he is bearing the terrible, lonely responsibility of saving human civilization from itself.
It's a heavy crown in his mind.
Right, so he steps out of his multi-tower skyscraper headquarters into the overcast, cold air of Kolhar. And the spaceport around him is not bustling with commercial trade and spice haulers like it used to during peacetime.
No, it looks like a heavily fortified military base.
Fuel tankers rumbling around, scout patrols launching, the air smells like exhaust fumes and winter chill.
And he is joined by his wife, Sioba. She is a fascinating, complex figure in her own right.
Oh, she's amazing.
She's a tall, elegant brunette, and her bloodline comes from the telepathically powerful sorceresses of the planet Rosak.
Right.
She has this very calm, regal demeanor cultivated from years of intense psychological training with the Sisterhood. And as they survey the spaceport, she tells Josef that Kolhar is impregnable.
She assures him they have defenses the rest of the Imperium cannot even begin to imagine. Defenses that will give nightmares to the Butlerian fanatics.
And to underscore her point, as she says this, they are literally watching 3 mechanical figures patrolling the perimeter of the spaceport.
But these aren't just guards in armor, they are Simic walkers. These are spider-like machines, taller than many of the surrounding buildings. They are driven by massive hydraulic pistons, heavily armored, and armed to the teeth with devastating weaponry.
We really need to explain what a Simic is, because the historical context is what makes them so terrifying to everyone in this universe.
It's a visceral reaction.
Exactly. Centuries ago, during the time of the thinking machines, Simics were the absolute scourge of humanity. They weren't just robots. A Simic was a disembodied human brain floating in a preservation canister, surgically wired into a heavily armored, incredibly lethal machine body.
Just horrific.
Originally, they were megalomaniacal humans who willingly discarded their physical bodies to become immortal machine overlords. They enslaved humanity for 1,000 years. The original Simics were finally destroyed at the end of the Jihad.
Right, so the mere shape of a Simic triggers a deep ancestral panic in every human being alive. But Joseph's scientists in his secret weapons labs have completely redesigned and recreated them.
With a twist.
A dark twist. Instead of power-hungry, megalomaniacal brains calling the shots, these new Simic walkers are controlled by the highly evolved brains of navigator candidates.
They are essentially using failed or specialized navigators as living biological CPUs for these war machines.
It is a dark, twisted application of biology.
It is. But let's look at Venport's internal justification for a moment. If we play devil's advocate, what are his alternatives?
Wow.
The Butlerians are actively sweeping across the galaxy, burning laboratories, destroying medical equipment, and executing scientists. If Venport doesn't build the Simics, if he doesn't embrace these taboo technologies, the fanatics will literally bomb human civilization back into the Stone Age.
Right.
In his mind, he has to embrace the aesthetics of the villain to save the species from a new dark age.
Okay, I have to push back on Josef Venport being the pragmatic savior here.
I don't know.
He stands there, stroking his thick, reddish mustache, and he's actually thinking, if only Roderick and I could sit down and negotiate like rational men.
Yeah, he really thinks that.
He tells himself he didn't want to be a rebel. He justifies assassinating Emperor Salvador by saying Salvador was an incompetent buffoon, and putting Roderick on the throne was a hard, rational decision required to save the human race from the Butlerian fanatics.
He thinks the Emperor is just being doggedly insistent on revenge.
Right, and that VenHold should just be levied a substantial blood fine paid in cash or spice, and then everyone goes back to normal.
The cognitive dissonance is staggering, isn't it?
It's completely delusional. I mean, he says he's a rational businessman just trying to keep the lights on. But let's look at his resume. He murdered a sitting monarch. He is building illegal, horrific cyborg spider mechs that historically enslaved humanity, and he is holding the galaxy's food and spice trade hostage, letting entire planetary populations starve to death.
Yeah, that's a tough resume to defend.
Is he pragmatic, or is he just a villain who refuses to look in the mirror?
What's fascinating here is that Venport's wealth and intellect have insulated him from the moral consequences of his actions. He genuinely believes his superiority grants him the moral authority to make unilateral, lethal decisions for the entire human species.
He really does.
He tells Sioba, "The human race is at stake, and I feel a tremendous obligation. I am the one with the rational thinking and the wherewithal to save us.
From his perspective, the rule of law and even the lives of millions of starving citizens are secondary to the ultimate survival of technological human progress.
He looks at the antique space folders the Imperial military uses, ships that take weeks or months to travel between stars without his navigators, and he knows with absolute certainty that he is the sole gatekeeper to the future.
And to see the biological source of that future, Joseph and Chioba get into a ground car and drive away from the spaceport into this broad, bowl-shaped valley on Kolhar.
This scene is incredible.
It is so visceral, it feels like descending into an alchemist's nightmare. The valley is filled with hundreds of massive, sealed, thick-walled tanks. Inside these tanks, you have highly concentrated spice gas swirling around under intense pressure.
And looking through the murky Plaz window ports, Joseph sees these mutated figures floating in the gas,
undergoing constant, agonizing mental convolutions.
These are the navigator candidates in the process of transformation. We touched on prescience earlier, but the biology of it is staggering.
Yeah, unpack that for us.
The source text explains that the human brain, in its natural state, cannot process
while simultaneously mutating their physical bodies into freakish, aquatic-looking beings.
Exactly.
But Joseph looks at them, floating in their gas tanks, their bodies distorted and elongated, and he doesn't see tragedy. He marvels at them.
He sees the future.
He views them as the pinnacle of human evolution, and more importantly, as his ultimate, unassailable monopoly. As long as he controls the spice and the mutation process, he controls the universe.
But the centerpiece of this valley, the focal point of the entire operation, is a large central tank sitting on an elevated marble platform. It looks almost like a religious shrine in the middle of this industrial facility.
And inside is Norma Chenva,
Joseph's great-grandmother, the very first navigator who discovered the process and transformed herself over a century ago.
Norma is barely human at this point. I mean, she has evolved so far beyond standard biology, she doesn't even need a ship equipped with Holtzman engines to fold space anymore.
Which is terrifying.
Right. Her mind is so powerful, so saturated with spice, that she can fold space and travel across the physical universe simply by thinking about it.
She exists in a constant state of sensory deprivation regarding the physical world, but she is surrounded by her personal spice dreams, viewing infinite possibilities stretching across the universe.
Yet, she still maintains contact with Joseph.
She keeps an eye on imperial politics, primarily because her driving, singular goal is to promote the creation of more navigators. She needs Venport's spice mining operations on the desert planet Arrakis to continue at all costs.
So Joseph steps up to the tank to ask her advice. He is feeling the pressure of the Emperor's impending attack, and he asks her a fundamental question of strategy.
He says, if I am more powerful than Emperor Roderick, should I hide here on Kolhar and build my defenses, or should I think in grander terms?
And Norma's warbling, synthesized voice comes through the speaker patch on the tank. She tells him, chillingly and without hesitation, "You have the power and ability to seize the throne, if that is what you wish."
Which completely throws Joseph off.
Totally throws him. He immediately protests. He says he doesn't want to be the emperor. He just wants to run his planetary banks, manage his spice operations, oversee his technological research, and have a sensible, compliant emperor who asks for his counsel and signs the checks.
He views politics purely as a tool to accomplish his business interests.
He complains that he just wants to go back to how things were a year ago so he can focus all his massive resources and energy on annihilating the Butlerian barbarians.
But Norma cuts right through his indecision. She tells him they need to go to Arrakis to secure the spice flow, because spice is the lifeblood of everything they do.
And when he hesitates, saying he has administrative details to finish on Kolhar first,
She basically tells him, you have already made your decision. She can see the paths of the future, and she knows his course is set.
because Joseph isn't just playing defense against the Emperor's incoming fleet, he has already dispatched a terrifying, proactive, offensive commando force to the planet Lampadas,
And Lampadas is the headquarters of the Butlerians.
which provides the perfect narrative transition to the other side of this galactic conflict. Because Venport says his true enemy isn't the Emperor is just an annoyance.
The true existential threat to Venport's empire of technology is the ideology of the fanatics.
So we have to look at exactly who he is attacking. We have to look at the people who are burning down the universe in the name of the human soul.
Let's shift the scene to the planet Lampadas, and we meet Manfred Tyranno, the charismatic, terrifying leader of the Butlerian movement.
And his physical reality is immediately shocking.
Very. Years ago, he was caught in a devastating explosion that nearly killed him. It left him with absolutely nothing below his hips. He is literally half a man.
The psychological weight of that severe physical disfigurement is profound and is the absolute engine of his ideology. We see him sitting in a cushioned chair late at night, looking down at where his body abruptly ends, and the text notes that the reality of it is still sometimes shocking to him.
But here is the brilliant political spin. His followers don't see his missing lower half as a weakness.
Not at all.
During their massive, frenzied rallies, they shout that he is twice the leader. His physical trauma has become the defining symbol of their religious martyrdom.
And a huge part of his ability to project that powerful image is thanks to his swordmaster, Anari Idaho.
She is a fascinating counterpart to him.
She is a large-framed, fiercely loyal warrior trained among the elite legendary swordmasters of the planet Genas. Her physical capability is the exact inverse of Manfred's physical limitation.
She tends to him in his simple fieldstone cottage. The walls inside the cottage are fitted with iron bars and handholds so he can move himself around using his massive, highly developed upper body strength.
But when he needs to present an imposing figure to a cheering crowd or intimidate his enemies, he rides strapped in a specialized harness high on Anari's shoulders.
When he is perched up there, elevated above everyone else, combined with his terrifying charisma, he feels like the most powerful person in the Imperium.
Which is an emotional necessity for him because Manfred feels an unbearable, crushing burden. We have to really unpack the theology of the Butlerians because it's not just a simplistic machines are bad argument.
No, it goes way deeper.
Manfred believes this conflict isn't about resources or territory or economic monopolies. He believes it is a literal, desperate war for the human soul.
After centuries of humanity being enslaved by thinking machines, he sees men like Josef Venport trying to re-enslave mankind through the back door.
The Butlerian philosophy argues that when humans outsource their struggles, their calculations, and their physical labor to advanced machines, the human spirit atrophies.
They believe relying on technology diminishes what it means to be human. He wants to create a new Eden, entirely free from the insidious stranglehold of machines.
It is a philosophy of extreme self-reliance driven by historical terror. He is actually sitting in his cottage weeping, missing his beloved mentor, Reyna Butler, who codified this path after the jihad.
And Anari Idaho steps closer, deeply concerned. She's a warrior who is willing to defend him to the death against any physical enemy. But she struggles with how to defend him against his own heavy, depressive emotions.
It highlights a deeply symbiotic relationship. He is the mind and the voice. She is the physical strength and the shield.
Then their quiet moment is interrupted by his truth-sayer, Sister Woodra. And Woodra brings a completely different, abrasive energy to the room.
She was trained by the Sisterhood before a massive ideological schism tore their school apart. She is vehemently anti-technology, perfectly aligned with Manfred, but she is blunt, impatient, and intensely focused on the grim logistics of their holy war.
She bursts into the room, complaining that Emperor Roderick still stubbornly believes the Butlerians are responsible for his sister Anna's disappearance.
Right. Woodra tells Manfred, very practically, that he needs to reach out and convince the Emperor otherwise. She recognizes that fighting both Venport and the Emperor simultaneously is a losing strategy.
But Manfred is completely unbothered by the Emperor's suspicions. He actually suspects the flighty girl was eaten by a swamp dragon while trying to flee the siege of the Mentat school.
He tells Woodra he thinks it's a miracle in disguise, that the Emperor's anger is currently focused entirely on Josef Venport. Let them bleed each other dry.
Anari points out the glaring, obvious flaw in that logic. She reminds Manfred that the Emperor will never ever forget that a Butlerian mob murdered his young daughter.
He has plenty of burning anger for both of them.
But Manfred is convinced, with the hubris of a fanatic, that alliances can shift, and that he can somehow coerce the Emperor into joining their holy crusade.
He is so utterly exhausted by the weight of leadership that he dismisses Woodra and her logbooks. He just wants to rest. Anari carries him to his austere, narrow bed and opens the window to let in the cool night air.
It sounds so peaceful, doesn't it? The capital city of Empok is sparkling with warm orange lights, insects are humming in the dark. It lulls you into a false sense of security.
And then the sky tears open.
Oh.
A thundering roar shatters the darkness. Heavy, massive objects are screaming down through the atmosphere, completely wreathed in the roaring flames of deceleration. 3 projectiles slam into the ground right outside the city limits with the force of meteor strikes.
This is the commando force Josef Venport sent. A fast VenHold warship covered in advanced stealth armor had effortlessly slipped past the primitive, low-tech Butlerian orbital patrols.
The ship was piloted by Drago Roger, Venport's leading mentat, and what Drago drops on the city is pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel.
The impact sites are simmering, lit by this eerie white and orange afterglow. And then the master shielded drop pods split open.
The text describes them opening like the jagged petals of armored flowers.
And out step 3 towering Cymex.
Heavy piston-driven legs grinding, weapon-studded body cores humming with power, each one containing a disembodied human brain directing the slaughter.
Remember our discussion about Cymex earlier? 2 of these 3 machines are controlled by the mutated brains of Navigator candidates, but the third one is different.
The third one is controlled by Ptolemy.
And Ptolemy represents a horrifying psychological milestone in Venport's technological progression. He is the first voluntary new Cymex.
Let me make sure I'm fully grasping the horror of this. The original Cymex from centuries ago were power-mad megalomaniacs who conquered humanity. Venport's recent Cymex were essentially brain-in-a-jar drones using failed navigators as biological hard drives.
Right.
But Ptolemy was a brilliant human genius, a scientist who consciously, willingly chose to discard his frail biological body, have his brain surgically excised, and placed into a massive, destructive mechanical spider tank.
Yes.
Why on earth would anyone choose that?
His motivation is pure, concentrated, agonizing hatred. Earlier in the text, before the drop on Lampadas, we see Ptolemy's brain suspended in pale blue electrofluid, communicating through a speaker patch in Venport's lab.
He clacks his giant, razor-sharp mechanical pincers together and says, "That sadistic monster burned my friend alive and forced me to watch. Manfred Turando must die."
He is talking about his colleague and friend, Dr. Elchan. A Balerian mob, acting on Manfred's orders, dragged Dr. Elchan out and burned him alive at the stake for his scientific work.
So Ptolemy hits the ground and he activates his massive mechanical legs. The advanced thought roads he actually helped develop himself give him incredible, precise control over his new metal body.
And his enhanced optics zoom in on the locals running out of their homes in absolute terror.
And here's the truly chilling part. Ptolemy feels absolutely no pity for these people. He looks at them fleeing, and his mechanical mind decides they deserve to suffer.
He thinks, sure, Manfred is the true evil, the head of the snake, but these followers are the ones who gleefully burned scientific advancements, who violently denied life-saving medical tech to the sick, and who cheered while his friend was murdered.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the dark poetry here is absolutely incredible. Look at the duality between the 2 leaders of this specific violent skirmish.
You have Manfred Turando. He lost half of his physical body to a violent explosion. And in response to that trauma, he became a religious fanatic fighting for the absolute purity of the human form, aggressively rejecting all machines.
On the exact opposite side, you have Ptolemy. Ptolemy suffered deep emotional trauma watching his best friend burn to death, and in response, he voluntarily surrendered his entire human body, rejecting his humanity to become a pure machine, solely to enact revenge against Manfred.
Wow. They are exact mirror images of trauma. One rejects the machine to save his humanity, the other rejects his humanity to become a machine.
And the psychological result of Ptolemy's transformation is terrifying. While marching on the city, Ptolemy involuntarily ignites his massive fire cannon because his brain experiences a sudden PTSD flashback to his friend screaming in the flames, and he accidentally sets a nearby house ablaze.
But then, realizing what he did, he doesn't feel remorse. He just leans into the destruction. He levels the home on purpose.
The 3 mechanical behemoths just start stomping on victims like insects, blasting indiscriminately, marching straight for Manfred's undefended fieldstone cottage.
Inari, Idaho, hears the explosions and the heavy mechanical footfalls coming, and she realizes instantly that her elite Janaz sword training is utterly useless against shielded, building-sized war machines.
So she doesn't even try to fight. She just grabs Manfred right out of his bed, dives out the window with him, and literally leaps across the rugged landscape into the darkness, using her incredible physical conditioning to carry him to safety, while the Cymex roast the Butlerian defenders alive and completely obliterate the cottage.
It is a devastating, overwhelming demonstration of power. But here is the crazy part that we need to unpack. Ptolemy's mechanical body, the intricate Cymic technology itself, is based on ancient thinking machine designs from centuries ago.
Venport scientists didn't invent this from scratch. They resurrected it. And to understand where Venport scientists are getting this nightmare tech, we have to look at the entity providing it to them. We have to look at the last great robot.
We have to examine the memory core of Erasmus.
Exactly. So we travel away from the burning city of Empok to the planet Denali. Denali is an isolated, highly toxic poison planet where Venport hides his most vital, sensitive research laboratories inside hermetically sealed domes.
His scientists working here are all brilliant minds who were recruited not just because of their massive intellect, but also because they share a deep, burning hatred of the Butlerians.
And their prized possession, sitting in the center of their lab, is Erasmus.
For those who might not grasp the sheer historical terror of that name, Erasmus is an infamous, legendary robot. During Serena Butler's jihad centuries ago, he was a high-level administrator in the Synchronized Empire.
He was responsible for an unimaginable amount of cruelty, horrific medical experiments, and havoc across human space. He is the boogeyman.
But after the Machine Empire fell, he survived. He actually hid in plain sight for decades at the Mentat School on Lampetus. And the headmaster of that school, a human named Gilbertus Aldens, had actually been raised from a feral child by Erasmus.
Gilbertus loved him and hid the robot's memory core to protect him.
Right, but when Manfred's Butlerian fanatics overran the Mentat school, they dragged Headmaster Gilbertus out into the courtyard, and Anari Idaho hacked his head off with a sword while Erasmus watched helplessly from hiding.
Drago Roger, Venport's Mentat, managed to escape the planet with Erasmus's memory core in a box and brought him here to the safety of Denali.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Erasmus is a machine. He operates on logic, data points, and algorithms. He spent centuries running horrific physical experiments on human slaves, trying to simulate emotions in his programming to understand his enemy.
But watching the fanatics execute Gilbertus triggered something entirely unprecedented.
A genuine, unsimulated emotion. We need to look closely at how his hardware operates. Erasmus isn't running on simple binary code. His cognitive core utilizes advanced gel circuitry, which is a highly complex fluid network that mimics the neural pathways of a biological brain.
The text states, the violent, unnecessary, and confusing death of Gilbertus had changed mental paths in his gel circuitry.
He realizes, through diagnostic analysis, that he has lapsed into silent anger, the very human emotion of anger. And he is reviewing this experience the same way he gathers all data, as a detached psychological study of his own processing failure.
It's an incredible concept. Think about the analogy here. It's as if a massive supercomputer that was built and tasked exclusively with solving complex mathematical equations suddenly decides, entirely on its own, that it wants to write a symphony.
But the only instrument it wants to use is a sledgehammer.
He tells the scientists in the dome, I intend to help you find ways not just to defend Venport Holdings, but to absolutely annihilate the Butlerians.
The physical setup in the laboratory is deeply bizarre and unsettling. Erasmus's growing Gelsphere core is resting on a metallic stand, and hovering right beside him, completely devoted to him, is Anna Corrino.
The Emperor's missing sister, the one Emperor Roderick is ready to start a galactic war over.
Exactly. The Emperor thinks Venport kidnapped her in a malicious plot, or that Manfred killed her during the siege, but she's right here on Denali.
Her brain was heavily damaged years ago by a severe psychotropic poison during a failed initiation at the Sisterhood School. The text describes her personality beautifully, but tragically, as being like stained glass, disjointed colors, and distorted images.
Her brothers originally sent her to the Mentat school on Lampetus for cognitive treatment, and that is where Erasmus found her in hiding. He made her his pet psychological project. Using his deep understanding of human psychology, he manipulated her soft, damaged mind into completely worshiping him.
And it is so incredibly creepy to watch. She fidgets around the sterile laboratory chamber, looking at the scientists defensively, saying, if Erasmus had been destroyed, then billions of people would never learn how brilliant he is, how admirable he is.
She exhibits profound Stockholm Syndrome.
And Erasmus, this ancient calculating machine, just tolerates it. He notes internally that he has endured enough hatred from humans over the centuries. He can accept some misplaced, pathetic adoration now.
He knows she is a highly valuable royal hostage for Venport, a massive political bargaining chip. So he just uses his psychological conditioning to keep her docile and close.
Meanwhile, the Denali scientists are furiously taking notes on their Tulaxa datapads. They recognize they have a gold mine. They are trying to extract centuries of lost technological and genetic secrets from his memory core.
One of the lead scientists, Dr. Deneb, is a Tulaxa biological researcher. He had to flee his home planet because the Butlerians branded his genetic cloning work unclean and targeted him for death.
Dr. Deneb asks Erasmus for his historical biological data, because, remarkably, centuries ago, Erasmus actually grew a perfect, flawless genetic clone of the jihad's great martyr, Serena Butler herself.
But Erasmus, ever the philosopher, notes that identical biology does not produce an identical personality. The clone was a massive disappointment to him. Still, he agrees to give the scientists all the biological data, and more importantly, he agrees to give them the devastating weapons designs for the old machine empire.
But he has one absolute condition. The knowledge must be explicitly used against the Butlerians. And then Erasmus says something that fundamentally challenges everything we know about artificial intelligence in this universe.
He says, "My greatest desire is to watch the Butlerian leader die, and the more painfully the better. I wish to experience the satisfaction of revenge."
I mean, this raises such a profound philosophical question, right? Can an artificial intelligence, no matter how advanced its gel circuitry, truly experience the emotional, visceral satisfaction of revenge?
Or is his system just executing a destructive new algorithm that he has mislabeled as a human emotion because he lacks the vocabulary for it?
He even asks the scientists for guidance, saying he has never truly understood the emotion of hatred and wishes to study it more deeply through application. And as he says this, Anna Corrino just looks at him with this sudden, ruthless smile.
It's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
We are looking at an immortal, super-intelligent machine with access to galaxy-ending weapons, actively trying to learn how to hate.
And he is doing it while manipulating the fragile mind of a royal hostage, effectively pulling massive political strings from inside a toxic dome at the edge of the universe.
But speaking of pulling massive political strings from the shadows, as manipulative as Erasmus is, he is a rank amateur compared to the organization we need to look at next.
We have to leave the poison domes of Denali and talk about the Sisterhood.
If you want to talk about organizations playing a game of cold, multi-generational calculus that makes everyone else look hopelessly short-sighted, you look at the Sisterhood.
We travel to the freezing, brutal landing field of the planet Wallach Nyax. This is the newly established headquarters of the Sisterhood, and we meet their absolute ruler, Mother Superior, Valya Harkonnen.
And Valya is intense. She's standing out in this biting, freezing wind, wearing a simple black robe, completely ignoring the cold, just by consciously readjusting her internal metabolism using her specialized training.
She has short black hair, hazel eyes that absorb every detail around her, and she is watching a passenger ship land. The ship is carrying a large group of Orthodox sisters who had openly rebelled against the previous Mother Superior, Orkella.
The bitter internal schism is over. Valya won, and now she has summoned these disloyal women to face her judgment.
She is newly appointed, but because she is a fully realized Reverend Mother, she carries the memories and experiences of millennia in her mind. And her primary, overwhelming concern right now is absolute, unquestioned control.
She watches them step off the ship and thinks to herself, "A promise broken once can be broken twice." She gives a benevolent speech telling these women they have an opportunity to rejoin the consolidated sisterhood and work toward their grand genetic goals.
But privately, her internal monologue is completely ruthless and terrifying. She is sending them to a secure dormitory for rigorous, brutal re-education. If they don't submit completely to her will, they will die.
She explicitly thinks she doesn't care if she loses a few along the way. The sisterhood will have one mind, and it will belong exclusively to her.
And to consolidate that power on a galactic scale, she is playing the most dizzying, high-stakes game of political chess in the entire Imperium. Standing beside her in the freezing wind is Sister Fiel.
Fiel is a large-boned, highly analytical mentat and truthsayer. Valya is sending Fiel on a covert mission to Seleucia Secundus on an S-Contran fold-space carrier.
She is going to fill the vacancy at the Imperial Court. Fiel is going to become Emperor Roderick's new personal truthsayer.
We should clarify what a truthsayer is. Through intense neural and physical training, a truthsayer can analyze microexpressions, pheromone output, vocal stress, and physical tics to determine with near absolute certainty if someone is lying.
They are invaluable to politicians, and Fiel's specific, highly classified mission from Valya is to use that position of trust to feed the Emperor highly damning, carefully curated information about Josef Venport.
To warn the Emperor that Venport is an existential danger to the entire Imperium.
Which is wildly treacherous, because Fiel, acting with mentat logic, points out the obvious contradiction. Venport literally saved the sisterhood.
Right. When they were in deep trouble, being hunted on Rosak, Venport arranged for them to move their entire operation to Wallach Nyax. His wife, Chioba, who was one of them, helped them retrieve their vital, irreplaceable breeding record computers from the jungles of Rosak.
Venport's money and ships are the only reason the Sisterhood survived the schism.
But Valya doesn't care about gratitude. Gratitude is a liability. She tells Fiel, I am not Rokola. She did not consider the implications of obligating the Sisterhood to one commercial magnate.
Valya aggressively refuses to be a puppet on Venport's string. She views him as an unpredictable warlord who expects to be repaid with incredibly high interest.
She says Venport's technological obsession is just as troublesome to their long-term plans as Manfred Tarando's religious fanaticism. She wants to remain ostensibly neutral, siding quietly with the Emperor to ensure the Sisterhood's survival while the two men destroy each other.
It's brilliantly pragmatic. It is pure, cold logic. But here's where Valya's pure pragmatism completely falls apart. She has a massive, glaring blind spot.
As she is watching the ship unload, she is listening to the constant chatter of other memory in her head. We need to explain this because it is crucial.
As a Reverend Mother, Valya has access to the accumulated ego memories of all her female ancestors and the previous Reverend Mothers. She carries thousands of ancient, long-dead sisters in her consciousness.
And these wise, ancient voices are practically yelling at her right now. They're saying, Reverend Mother Valya, you focus far too much on your vengeance against the Atreides.
They tell her to drop the petty, historical family feud, that her destiny is guiding the genetic greatness of humanity, not settling scores.
If we connect this to the broader themes we've been discussing, Valya's obsession with the Atreides-Harkonnen feud is her fatal flaw. The voices in her head, representing millennia of accumulated human wisdom, tell her the Sisterhood's survival is vastly more important than the enmity of two noble families.
But Valya just pushes the voices to the background. She stubbornly thinks, why can't I advance the interests of the Sisterhood and my great house at the same time?
She absolutely refuses to let go of her Harkonnen pride. She vowed to reinstate her disgraced family to galactic prominence, and she is deeply compromising the Sisterhood's resources to do it.
Right. I have to strongly push back on Valya here as a competent leader. She is running the most powerful secret society in the universe, an organization dedicated to the long-term survival and genetic manipulation of the human race over thousands of years. And she's risking it all because she intensely hates a guy named Vorian Atreides.
Is she fundamentally compromised as a leader because she is entirely enslaved by her own ego? That is the exact question the text wants the reader to grapple with.
And we see the devastating, intimate human cost of Valya's massive vendetta right there on the landing pad. Valya makes eye contact with one of her personal guard escorts, her own younger sister, Tula Harkonnen.
Kula. Tula is such a profoundly tragic figure in this narrative. She has this soft, sweet, physical beauty, curly blonde locks. But beneath that, the text notes lurk the danger of razors.
Valya personally trained her to be one of the absolute best fighters and assassins in the Sisterhood, and Valya forced Tula to commit the most intimate, psychologically horrifying assassination imaginable.
Tula was ordered by Valya to seduce and marry a young innocent man named Ori Atreides, and on their wedding night, she murdered him. Valya thinks of this as a delightful, wicked touch. The absolute pinnacle of revenge.
But when Valya looks at Tula now on the landing pad, she sees deep uneasiness. Because Tula doesn't share Valya's sadistic, consuming joy, Tula is showing actual profound remorse and guilt for killing Ori.
She expressed regret to Valya that the situation couldn't be different between their families, and Valya is deeply disturbed by this show of empathy. Valya literally cannot conceive of a reality where the Harkonnens and Atreides aren't killing each other.
So she's sending Tula back home to the planet Lankyvale for a sabbatical, ostensibly to rest, but actually to be reminded of her brutal family loyalties. But Valya knows deep down she's going to have to keep a very close, paranoid eye on her own sister.
Valya's grand machinations aren't just high-level abstract political theory. They destroy real innocent families. The brutal murder of Ori Atreides sent ripples of intense grief and terror across the galaxy.
And it forces us to follow that bloody trail of a wedding night assassination away from the cold, calculating logic of Wallach Nikes, all the way to a quiet, forgotten fruit orchard on the edge of space.
Which brings us to our final section, the ghosts of the past in the Buriak orchards. We set a totally different, incredibly jarring scene here.
We are on the sunny, peaceful, agrarian planet of Kepler, and we meet two men masquerading as bearded, down-on-their-luck laborers looking for work. One is 19-year-old Willem Atreides. The other is his great however many greats grandfather, Vorian Atreides.
Vorian, or Vor, is a walking myth. The historian Harouk Ari describes him as being like the wind, passing through and moving on for centuries. Thanks to life extension treatments from the old machine empire, he is a centuries-old hero of the Butlerian Jihad who fought the thinking machines on the front lines.
But he doesn't want to be a legend anymore. The psychological toll of living that long, of seeing everyone you love die, is immense. He just wants to retire in peace.
He had found a quiet, hidden life here on Kepler years ago, married a woman he deeply loved, and raised a large, happy family.
But the Harkonnen feud, driven by Valya, would not let him go. A pair of Harkonnen assassins tracked him down and murdered his wife, Mariella. Then they tracked him to the desert planet Arrakis and killed his friend Griffin Harkonnen, which ironically made the Harkonnens blame Vor for the death, escalating the feud even further into madness.
And now Tula has murdered young Ori on his wedding night on Caladan. So Vor and Willem, Ori's grieving, furious younger brother, have come to Kepler in absolute secret.
Their mission is deeply tragic and incredibly tense. Vor has a massive extended family living on Kepler, including his great-grandson Jeff and Jeff's wife Nobinia. Vor and Willem get hired as simple fruit pickers at Jeff's orchard using false names.
They are terrified that Tula Harkonnen is going to show up to seduce and murder another Atreides boy to continue Valya's revenge. They have to watch over their family from afar, without letting the family know who they really are, because proximity to Vorian Atreides brings absolute certain death.
The sensory experience of this scene is such a stark, brilliant contrast to everything else we've discussed. We've talked about gaudy spaceships, toxic domes, and massive war machines. Here, they are walking down a dirt driveway. It's a comfortably warm autumn day. The trees are heavy with ripe red, yellow, and pink buryak fruit.
Vor picks up a fallen pink buryak, cuts out the bruised part with his pocket knife, and hands a slice to Willem. He tastes the sweet fruit and says, "This is how life should be, simple, pleasurable, without hatred and warfare."
And Willem is sitting next to him, practically vibrating with tense, unresolved anger. He says, "Ori and I had that on Caladan, the fishing, the rescue jobs. Life was normal there until she came." He's peeling his piece of fruit, but he's aggressively attacking it with his knife.
Willem is only 19. This is his first time off his home planet, and his youth has been entirely consumed by grief and the burning desire for revenge against Tula Harkonnen.
It is amazing to synthesize this entire text down to this one moment. Think about the scope of what we've covered. In the previous chapters, we have an emperor marshaling 70 warships and risking his empire. We have a corporate tycoon building-sized cyborg spider mechs to hold the galaxy hostage.
We have an immortal robot manipulating royalty, and we have a reverend mother bending the genetic future of the universe to her will.
But the absolute emotional core of this entire massive story rests right here. It rests on a centuries-old grandfather eating a piece of fruit in the sunshine, absolutely terrified that a blonde assassin is coming to kill his great-grandkids.
It grounds the epic, unimaginable scale of the universe in deeply personal, relatable stakes. Think about a grudge you hold, maybe a professional rivalry or a family dispute. Now imagine that grudge is 1,000 years old, heavily armed, and dictates the survival of entire planets. That's what we are looking at.
Vor watches his family eating together at a long wooden table. 10 young children laughing in the sun. He tells Jeff he likes large families and wishes he had one, hiding the agonizing fact that this is his family, and he can never truly be part of it again.
And meanwhile, young Willem goes into town, spreading a picture of Tula, warning local shopkeepers about a ruthless murderer hunting ghosts.
Willem even flirts a bit with a local girl named Opala. He takes her out dancing one night. Vor watches him, remembering his own distant youth, knowing Willem won't stay with her. Willem can't have a normal life, because they are just waiting.
They have to wait 2 agonizing weeks for the next non-VenHold transport ship to arrive, just to stand hidden at the spaceport and see if Tula Harkonnen steps off it.
The tension of that waiting is suffocating. If she doesn't arrive, they know the Kepler family is safe for now, and they can leave to go hunt her down somewhere else in the cold universe. But the cycle of violence just never, ever ends for Vorian.
Which brings us back to the core mechanism of this entire universe, the underlying engine driving everything we've discussed.
Okay, let's tie this all together. If you are listening to this and trying to grasp the absolute shortcut to understanding the deep lore of this incredibly complex universe, what is it? It is realizing that every single major player in this galaxy firmly believes they are the pragmatic savior of humanity.
Emperor Roderick thinks he's restoring necessary, legitimate rule, Josef Venport thinks he's preserving vital technological survival. Manfred Toronto thinks he's protecting the pure human soul. Valya Harkonnen thinks she's expertly guiding human evolution.
But the reality, as the sources continually reveal, is that every single one of them is actually driven by unhealed, deeply personal trauma. Roderick can't let go of his murdered brother and daughter. Ptolemy can't let go of his burned friend.
Erasmus is obsessed with his executed ward. Valya cannot let go of a multi-generational family feud that her ancestors started. Even young Willem is driven entirely by the murder of his brother.
They are all making galaxy-shaking, apocalyptic decisions based on intimate personal grief. Understanding those interlocking motivations, seeing how small human pain scales up to destroy planets, is how you decode this massive space opera.
And it leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to mull over as we conclude. We are looking at a universe where humans fought a horrific, bloody jihad to ensure they would never again be ruled by cold, calculating, unfeeling machines.
But look closely at how the humans are actually acting. Grief, hatred, and the relentless pursuit of revenge are systematically stripping away their empathy.
It is turning these human leaders into rigid, unfeeling mechanisms of destruction, blindly executing their vendettas regardless of the massive collateral damage. So the ultimate question is, in their desperate, violent fight against the machines, are they actually winning, or are they just becoming the very thing they tried to destroy?
Are they fighting the machines or just becoming them? Wow, that is a heavy, brilliant, unsettling thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the murky, complex waters of this universe. Keep reading, keep questioning everything you read, and we will see you next time for another deep dive.